No, that's not for you, not just for Charles, but just for all of us. I'm sure all of this was overwhelming, and I'm sure people have tons and tons of questions, or maybe you're just too dazed. But whatever it is, this is the opportunity for you guys to, yeah. You want to
I mean, I can project.
Yeah, I can.
I'm Caro. I'm a senior at Sarah Lawrence studying public policy and political science. So my question is for all of you, and it's how do you imagine the role and responsibility of academia in resisting Trump?
We need to go on strike. General strike.
She says, I'm not an academic. I like that. I think we have several responsibilities. One is to educate our students both about the facts of the situation, but also about the history of resistance in this country, and what has worked and what has not worked, and what those of us who have been activists as well as academics, what we have learned from that process. And I've been an activist as long as she's been organizing unions, and hopefully I've learned a few things. So I think we have a dual responsibility in terms of education, both in terms of, one thing I have learned, you have to have both the facts and you have to have a strategy that draws attention to those facts. There's nothing worse than people who are at a demo and doing civil disobedience, and somebody sticks a mic in their face and says, "Why are you here?" And they go, "Well, right?" You know, you have to know the facts, and you have to know them in a way that allows you to get your message across quickly and persuasively. And that takes practice, and that takes a deep understanding of the topic that you're talking about. I would hope that one implication of this panel is that each of you will figure out what area of this you want to concentrate on. You can't do everything. You will burn out. You will be dead by midterms, all right? So figure out one thing you want to concentrate on and go study it for everything you're worth, and figure out what needs to be done there, and then figure out actions with other people that will actually make an impact in that area. And you can use us as resources. I've got about a half a dozen organizations on the flip side of that thing I handed out that you can work with, but figure out where you want to go. Take care of yourself in the process. We don't need any more crispy critters, as I call them, burnout cases. You know, naps, chocolate, bubble baths, Ray, okay? But figure out where you want to put your heart, where you want to put your mind, and really run with it. So,
can I just add to that? One thing that I think is great about higher education is that there are so many levels going on at the same time, and there's a word now that's circulating, intersectionality. It's like everybody's using that word. That's the new thing. I think that at universities you sort of feel that the most, in colleges, because there is an intersectionality within this institution. You have workers who work, all kinds of workers. You have teachers, you have administrators, you have people working in the dorms, you have people working, taking care of the clerical workers, and there is that intersectionality right here on campus. And I think you're right about joining something and being part of an organization, but I think it's critical, though, that those organizations intersect, and that you really reach out to the different populations on this campus. My union has been organizing graduate teaching assistants and research assistants. It's been a very difficult, long fight, because the government has said, okay, they're workers, and then they say, okay, they're not workers. It goes back and forth. We've continued to organize since the 1990s, and so, you know, where there are unions on your campus, it's a really great place to connect. Our union is connecting on our public campuses with the Dreamers. That's another great place to connect. Yesterday there was a hearing in Connecticut about financial aid for Dreamers in the public institutions. Our union has now endorsed that legislation, and we're going to all of their rallies and their press conferences, and we want them to come to our movement building activities as well. So I think that a university is a great place for you to really find an ability to connect with different communities, and you should take advantage of that.
This is not self-congratulations because you're at Sarah Lawrence, okay? But you do have, and just to sort of articulate this point, you do have a unique opportunity here, and in the kind of education you get, to really relentlessly pursue questions, looking at them, looking at the big picture in terms of the rhetoric that flows out of the political arena, but really looking underneath it, beyond it, through it, in a kind of a relentless manner, right? Looking at history, looking at, evidence, history, all of that. I always think about, when you see a magician, right, on stage. Say if you see a movie, say The Illusionist, and you say, well, there's this strange thing happening over here. Somebody's being chopped down the middle, and then they come back together again, right? And that's a kind of illusion that is placed on us by politicians. And Donald Trump happens to be the most toxic version of that, but you have other versions of that too, right? And I think that as an active citizen, as active citizens, you have to be able to cut through the illusion, right? You have to be able to have that analytical thinking that will be able to cut through, pardon the expression, the bullshit, right? And be able to say, well, this is not correct. In the way that was just talked just now, say, for example, that refugees are terrorists, right? This is part of the, of the belief system. Or that there's something called a free market, and all we need to do is just basically, pollute the hell out of the world, and somehow the free market is going to lift us to, right? What? To a better place. Yeah, I mean, you'll be, so this, look, as an economist, and I think that, look, why do we have 3 economists over here? Is this disciplinary bias? Probably. But, look, guys, economics and economic discourse and its use and misuse by both the Democrats and the Republicans has been at the heart of this tragedy that we confront today, right? I don't think I would say anything new here, but if Hillary Clinton had won, you could be very sure that Wall Street interests would have been in her cabinet. Okay? So let's be clear about what it is that's thrown at us and how can we challenge it.
If I could just add real briefly, my favorite Joan Robinson quote, that the major reason to study economics is so that economists can't pull the wool over your eyes. And I think that's exactly right.
So I just want to also add, right, I think outside of the analytical component, which I think is an extremely powerful and important aspect of the very specific role of academia, I also study kind of churches and social movements, right? And one of the things that makes religious organizations or religious institutions powerful organizing institutions is because people are in contact with each other on a regular basis, right? You see people all the time. And while when you're away from Sarah Lawrence or away from educational institutions, you will find some of that in your jobs, in the bowling teams, right, that you join, or in the art space things, or in these other kinds of spaces, right? Right now, you actually are literally face-to-face with your community every day, right? And really kind of, right, for most of you who are living on campus, right? Not only in classes, but kind of over food, right, before you go to bed, in the libraries, like walking across camp, right, whatever it is, you are in contact with one another. And so I also think that one of the powerful things about kind of academic spaces in this moment and in other moments like this, right, is that you have the unique opportunity to actually engage in these discussions with one another over and over and over again, right? I think it also gives you an opportunity to imagine. Charles, I think, was absolutely right, we need to not have kind of a failure in terms of a lack of imagination, right? You get to create, and that should definitely be kind of one of the things that we look at in academic spaces as well.
Elke Zuern.
Hi, my name is Jamee K. I'm in the Women's History program, kind of in the existential crisis phase of that program. But I'm studying, my thesis is on the asylum system, and right now I feel like it's kind of slipping through my fingers as I'm writing. And I almost have a fear about critiquing it because I feel, it might be a moment where I should be salvaging as opposed to critiquing, which is scary. And what I keep hearing from all the lawyers that I am studying and interviewing is, it's okay if we're saving one person, even if it's to the detriment of, the hundreds or thousands of other refugees that we're then excluding by having such a narrow definition of what a refugee is. So my question is basically, what should I do? What's the role of critique in these systems that are somewhat helpful but long-term detrimental and perpetuate incredibly problematic discourse?
I would say something just broadly to the idea of criticism. In social movement studies, one of the problems historically has been that so many people who write on social movements they agree with. Not a bad thing in and of itself, but then that they've been resistant to critically engage often because it feels like such a crisis where you have to keep supporting it. But if you don't engage in some critical analysis, we can't learn from ways to improve it. So critique with the idea of improving, of moving forward. Don't stop critiquing. Don't close your mind. I mean, that's one of the big challenges, I think, in a moment like this. When entire groups of people feel so threatened, there's a real possibility of responding with groupthink. We don't like this, we don't like that. So one thing to keep in mind is to carefully interrogate policies, to find the pieces that are most problematic, to be able to speak clearly about that. But then also, have the criticism, but also have an idea of the way forward. Don't simply fall into the trap, in response to the other question, of just simply critiquing. I was critiquing my 5-year-olds for leaving a march saying, ho, ho, hey, hey, ho, ho, Donald Trump has got to go. I'm like, no, you can't do that. You've got to be more explicit. They're 5. You guys are way older. So have the clear aspects of policy so that you're also open to talking to somebody who maybe comes from a very different position, but you can find something in common, and maybe you can learn something from them too.
Mimi. Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts. It really means a lot. My name is Mimi. I'm a senior. I'm studying economics, and I'm very passionate about social justice and human rights. So I think talking about race, ethnicity, Islamophobia, and refugees is very important. But one of my struggles is that whenever I talk about it with people, I get emotional, and I cannot, it's very, we talk sometimes just to reply, but not to listen. And for me to listen to someone who's white supremacist is very difficult because that person clearly does not know how to be, what is it to be a person of color in this country? What is it to feel marginalized? So but I also feel it's important to listen what they have to say, because you have to be able to deconstruct what they're saying to understand where you're coming from. So how do you not be emotional and, think about the rationality of what they're saying?
If I could just say a couple of things. The first is that I don't think there's anything wrong with being emotional, and that if you're not emotional when you're talking to somebody about refugee crisis, there's something wrong with you. I mean it, that part of what has to happen is that you need to connect your incredible passion and fear and anger about the situation. The other person needs to feel that, and that's ultimately part of how you change their mind. But the other thing I would say is, for God's sake, don't go alone. That, I'm serious, that you should be with 3 other people who can support you and help you to make and support you in dealing with the emotional impact of what you're doing and can help you to make these arguments. So I think that we need to take care of each other while we are engaging in those kinds of conversations, and take care of yourself before and after. I'm not, it sounds cliche, but I mean it. We need to take care of ourselves when we do this, because it's very draining, it's very difficult. Even if you're not talking about something as dear to your heart as I know that refugees are to your heart, right? So, yeah, don't go alone. And yeah, emotional is okay.
If not just for your own physical safety.
Yes.
And there's also a line, you know, when someone crosses a line,
Yeah, sometimes you just say.
racist, sexist, whatever, you just say, all right, enough.
Charles.
Facts, facts, and more facts. I wanted to speak to facts because I listened to your eloquent articulation of the issues facing journalism and the vapid, cowardly stance of NPR to call it what? Unsubstantiated assertions? They can't say the word lie, he lied again. We're at a very peculiar moment in this society right now where the issue of truth and facticity, yes, it's a multi-syllable word, but it's the status of the fact is being demolished, it's being liquefied. And if you liquefy the notion of the truth and facts, you're undermining the basis of civil discourse and of a rational society. We need facts and critique and truth-finding in order to be able to parse the true from the false. And I'm astonished that NPR has taken this stance. And it gives me a sense of how the status of assertions of social reality is being profoundly undermined. It's no joke. The notion of alt facts, the notion of alt-right is an abomination. And this is why learning how to analyze text in college with your professors is of fundamental importance.
May I just say something? We have 15 minutes left, so let's keep questions and comments really brief because we want to get as many, we want to also get more students and people in the audience to talk. Janine, did you want to say something?
I would say something very quickly to that it's not, that it's about power also. It's not new. In fact, a USA Today reporter and a New York Times reporter years ago were talking to a group of journalism students and saying, you can't, and as the New York Times reporter said, you can't just say the president is lying. They were talking about George W. Bush, and they were saying, no, you just can't say it. And the woman from USA Today said, I actually think it's more powerful when we say his words did not comport with our, you know, like they tell themselves these stories, but the thing is, that has to do with power because they are comfortable saying other people lie. They're comfortable saying certain people lie. So it is both the failure to, you know, giving people the right to their own facts, but only certain people, you know, only certain people.
Chloe.
Yeah, I was going to ask if anybody had anything to say in terms of like mass mobilization, like restriction to access of nuanced critiques, and people wanting to like mobilize still, and like how to deal with that. That was really big. We were specific. So like in terms of the Women's March, like keeping critique open while also continuously mobilizing large amounts of people with different opinions and views about social issues that may or may not be in line with the actual issues that are happening.
Just that's really hard, and it's going to be an endless problem. When I was in college in the 1960s at Berkeley, in the anti-war movement, students for Democratic Society, we'd get together to organize a big anti-war march, and then at the planning meeting, it would dissolve into fights over what the wording would be on the placards and the concern that the Socialist Workers' Party would inadvertently get credit for something that was really planned by progressive labor. And I remember sitting there just with my jaw hanging open and saying, you know, we all agree we should stop this war, right? I mean, there's this sort of common list of things. And so I think it's a really hard balancing act. I think you coalesce around the things that you strongly agree with, but then you have to, within that, respect the idea that there are going to be different analyses, and you don't somehow privilege, think you know, yours is the kind of most insightful analysis as opposed to somebody else's. Now, obviously, you have to draw lines, right? I know with the Women's March, there was a tension about whether the anti-abortion feminists could include themselves in the group, and the group drew the line and said, no, actually, that's a step over. And there's so, and in other circumstances, maybe it wouldn't have been. But, I mean, people, you make those choices. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'd say, broad tent, everybody's involved, invited, racist, doesn't matter, come on in. But you have to find a way of coalescing the fundamental things you agree with while allowing for difference. And that's easy to say and really hard to do. So I guess the thing that's worth noting is it's going to be always a problem.
Can I just say one thing about that, though? I think there's a lot of discussion right now about whether or not, how broad we should be. And I sort of said it when I said within the labor movement, I don't think we should struggle to always have unity. I think that there are going to be divisions. I also feel like it goes to Trump supporters and white supremacists. I don't want to try and change them. I think that ultimately people like that can change. It's not that I believe they can't be moved or changed. But right now, I think we're in a moment where we have to defend our democracy and we have to make progress and we have to find mobilizations that will move us forward. So I would rather coalesce with the people we have general agreement with, find those people. I would like to move the middle. Somebody talked about moving the middle. You can move the middle. And I think that's where we should focus our energy and not try and water things down so much that we're too nebulous. We don't have a real point of view, but at the same time not get hung up with our differences. So it is a real difficult balancing act, but I think we can do it.
Lena, hi, thank you so much. I was just wondering, and forgive me if this question is too vague, if anyone could speak to some specific policies that a town near us, say like Bronxville, which has a lot of resources, but is sort of bubbled off from people who might benefit from those resources, could implement to resist like national policies or generally become more progressive.
Okay, I have a suggestion. We have about 10 minutes left, so how about we take a bunch of questions, right? And then we can sort of go around the room and then we can sort of respond. I know that Tobias, you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi, Tobias. I was wondering how with the obvious influence Donald Trump is having on the Mexican economy and his threat to withdrawing from NATO, how this is going to affect the geopolitical landscape and how we can kind of include that in our domestic movement in terms of how we want to create change here, but also how his ramifications are also affecting the world, how we can include that in how we talk.
Yes, that's my wife over there.
I have a question, and this is for everybody, but particularly Julie for you. I'm here. I was talking, and everybody's commentary was just riveting. But I was struck by you saying, let's. I don't think I can change, who Trump is and the whole movement there, but let's become more progressive. I think we can focus on being progressive, especially in the union. I was wondering specifically what you had in mind and how would that happen and what would you do to go about it and recommend to at least the audience that you hear, particularly when funding is going to be removed now from unions. Look who we have in the cabinet with labor, the gag orders coming down left, right, and center within a few days. So specifically, how would that movement look towards becoming more progressive?
Wow, lots of, okay. Okay, go ahead, and then you, yeah.
So my question is, there's been a lot of talk on the panel about legal solutions, making sure we're keeping Trump to the law. But with Trump simply obtaining 100 federal judge appointments, with him gaining Sessions as the Secretary of Justice, with the new Supreme Court nomination coming next week, how are we to combat Trump when he essentially has the judicial system in his pocket? What can we do as activists and citizens to assure that our justice system, which has been failing, I think that we can all agree on, from failing any further when he has such a powerful control?
Yes.
I was just wondering in response to NPR and the corporate media situation, if you could provide a few examples of independent news sources we can look to and can trust.
And one final one.
I had a question about international affairs and how do you think will Trump impact the rise of the far-right movement in Europe, and does he have an agenda on Syria?
Okay, I'll yield to a moment of weakness. There's just one more hand up there.
I guess I'd like more specificity on how to become more progressive, because like at this institution we say that we're a progressive institution, and I think it's easy to fall back on that word as like a way to stagnate without like making motion.
All right, guys.
I've got an easy one.
Go ahead, Janine.
Democracy Now!, the radio show, is an excellent resource. The Intercept, Truth Out, Alternet, and Truth Out and Alternet are in particular aggregator sites, so you'll find articles there from lots of different other outlets, and then you can follow it back. You know, then you can learn about lots of other things. But we always say at FAIR, there really isn't, it's not like there's one resource that you can then say, aha, this has the truth, it's any more than New York Times or Democracy Now! There's really no substitute for informing yourself independently and for keeping those critical thinking skills that you're learning in play when you're reading the New York Times, when you're reading somebody's blog, when you're reading something from your uncle and it's in all caps, the same skills go into interpreting every text that's in front of you. Always ask yourself what's not on the page.
I should just say that let's all of us, make this quick. And that was great. Just what Janine did. This is the role model right now here. Okay? So go ahead, whoever wants to respond. Yeah.
On Europe, the far right in Europe, I think it's up to European voters, but clearly there's a lot of contestation there. So once again, learning more about what's going on. France has elections coming up, Germany has elections coming up. I'm not suggesting the far right is going to win either one of those, but learning about what's going on, talking to friends who maybe can vote in those countries is a key piece. Resistance, the more that Americans demonstrate, large numbers of Americans demonstrate concern with what Trump is doing, can influence movements in other countries. There's effects of movements sharing information, right? On Syria, I think the short story is if Trump withdraws funding that the US has been offering to rebels in Syria, countries like Saudi Arabia are going to step up more to increase their funding, which is going to have an effect there, which is going to affect Trump in other ways. So that's really complicated as to how that'll go down. I don't claim to have enough expertise on the ground to really know that. But I think that's really not as straightforward as we might think.
I'll take one. I don't know where the person was who asked about being progressive. Up there. I can't see up there, but hello, wherever you are. There are two things I would say. I think that we on this campus have begun to talk about race, and I think we need to continue to do that, race and ethnicity in all of its forms. But we don't talk much about class. We don't talk about class at all, as a matter of fact. And we don't talk about class on this campus, and we don't talk about class in terms of workers on this campus very much, and we sure don't talk about class in the surrounding area. We're, 500 feet from Yonkers, right? We need to also get off of this campus as much as we need to stay here and learn how to parse text and do all those things, and those are very important skills to learn. But we also need to engage with the communities and with the movements going on right off campus. One of the most important desegregation suits in the country happened in Yonkers, right? So we need to also get off campus and analyze what's going on, bring it back, talk about it, go back out. We need to have a process of back and forth between this campus and the communities.
I would say a couple things. One, if you don't know about unions very much, then find out, because I really believe it's the labor movement and it's the workers' movement that's going to be the foundation of progressive change. And so that would be my first thing. The second thing is I think we really need to take a page out of the far right book, the Tea Party book. I think we have to put pressure on our friends in Congress, on the Democrats, to resist. I think we have to demonstrate in front of Schumer's office, because I know him well, he's done a lot of good things, but I think we have to say it's not a time to make compromises to get things done, because we have to stop the bad things that are going to happen. That should be our main focus. We should insist that there is no Supreme Court appointment under Trump. They wouldn't let Obama do it. We have to resist that. So I feel like this is not a time for compromise. I think we should put a lot of pressure on Democrats to raise bills in Congress and in the state legislature and in our cities, raise bills that are far-reaching, that are idealistic, that are dreams, you know, and aspirations, instead of thinking we're going to get things done through compromise. In terms of universities, I feel like we should build unions on university campuses, and that you all can play a very important role in getting to know the unionized workers on your campus, getting the unionized workers to work with administration, to go to Congress and say, don't stop the funding of sciences, to go to the marches, scientists, even if you're not a scientist. You know, those are the kinds of things that you can do right here on this campus.
So I'll speak a little bit to this question of how do we become more progressive? And I would say, yes, how do we become more progressive? So one, obviously, from my perspective, right, we should be fighting back enforcement every step of the way. Number two, I think by way of an example, by posing the question back, right, is, right, we saw undocumented youth, 17 years old, 18 years old, right, undocumented, no status, right, taking on the police, taking on detention centers, taking on deportation, right, putting themselves on the line, right. This gives us at least one example, multiple examples rather, right, of how young people kind of in their imaginations and creativity can really kind of change rhetoric, discourse, policy, right. So I look forward to seeing what everyone's going to do. The last point that I want to make is to this question of emotion. I think emotion is very powerful, and I think our vulnerability is very powerful, but I think we do not owe that to everyone. I think it's really important for us to kind of understand, right, that we are facing people and institutions, right, that will deny us dignity, right, that will kind of deny our presence, our humanity, that are targeting us. And I think we need to be more strategic in how we face those institutions and those people, and then think about how we can use our emotion and reserve that emotion, right, in places of care or where we can be vulnerable and accountable with others who would also be vulnerable and accountable with us. I'll say that.
The difficulty, I guess this is, I guess, the rounding off here, right? Almost 5. The difficulty here is that we have a situation here where we have a president who has no moral compass, right? There's no moral compass here, and zero intellectual capacity, no capacity for governance. So the resistance and the unity have to be strategic, for sure, have to reach across different groups, for sure. It's also got to be uncompromising, relentless, no holds barred, push back against what I feel, and those of you who know me in this audience know that I don't use words loosely. This is 21st century style fascism, okay? We're sliding in that direction, and I mean that word very, 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 after giving that a lot of thought. This is 21st century style fascism. And we have to provide, so what does it mean to be progressive? Progressive means to be all of those, in the sense, the resistance, unity, and at the same time being absolutely uncompromising in the face of what is clearly, and I was really struck by the point that Mary made earlier on about the 430 and the family that you were talking about. That, to be able to do that, there's something fundamentally evil and a lack of morality. In the face of that, it's going to be a no holds barred pushback at every step of the way. No compromising, no wishy-washiness. That's the way I see it. Okay, thank you so much.